Hi everyone, so this is my video for the most amazing fluffy apple muffins which are perfect going into the autumn season or fall. And these are completely gluten-free and dairy-free, but you can just adjust them to your diet. But I've adjusted them to be gluten-free and dairy-free, and they're super fluffy, not crumbly, they're great. So I'm starting off by cutting my apples into quite small, about 1 centimeter cubed pieces. These apples I got, they were freshly picked. I picked them from a spot that I know that I go to for apple picking, and they're cooking apples. So these apples are a bit more on the sour side, which I like because it kind of contrasts with the sweetness of the muffin. But you could use a sweeter apple like pink ladies or anything like that. And any type of apple would work, honestly. But these are the ones I used, and then I just get them into a bowl of water whilst I get on with the recipe, so that they don't brown too much because they are fresh apples and they're like organic, so they don't have anything on them, so they can brown a bit easy. So that's the first step anyway. And I did 4 apples. It was about once cut, probably about a cup and a half worth of apple. Just do as much apple as you would like, really. But I used 4 apples, 4 average sized apples. So I clean up that mess, and then we can get on with the rest of the recipe. So after that, the first thing you'll need is to cream your butter and your sugar. So this makes 12 muffins, and they're quite chunky muffins. So I do 220 grams of dairy-free butter. I use the stork butter or margarine, and then I cream that with 20 grams of sugar. And I use granulated sugar, but you can use granulated or caster. I use white sugar, but you could use a bit of golden if you want a bit of that goldeny flavour. So I'm just getting the butter into the bowl to begin with, and I'm doing it in my stand mixer, in my KitchenAid stand mixer, but you could definitely use like an electric hand whisk as well. That wouldn't matter, or a completely hand whisk if you prefer as well. So we want to cream the butter and the sugar first, because that will make a better texture in the muffin. You could reduce the amount of sugar for sure as well, because we've got the apples in which are quite sweet. You could definitely reduce it to 180 to 200 grams. If you're looking for more of a breakfast muffin, I think that could definitely be done. Or you could cut all the sugar out and maybe do about 100 grams worth of honey as well if you were looking to reduce your sugar intake. But on this day I am not. I'm just making these for a fun treat. So anyway, I'm going to get that into the machine now and cream that. And it will only take a couple minutes, and probably not even that, like 30 seconds to a minute mixing for it to be nice and well mixed through. So I get that. Anyway, and I get that on. Whilst it's doing that, you can get out the rest of your ingredients that you're going to need, which is 220 grams of gluten-free self-raising flour, 4 eggs, half a teaspoon of xanthan gum, 1 teaspoon of gluten-free baking powder, and some cinnamon and nutmeg as well. I like a little bit of nutmeg with my cinnamon. These really make you feel so autumny. And I actually had one heated up with some custard, some warm custard, and it was so good. So I definitely recommend that too. And these are like an apple streusel muffin because we add like a kind of crumble topping to it. Anyway, you can see my butter is becoming nice and mixed through with the sugar. So that means we're about done. So I'm about to turn off the machine and move on to the next steps. There you go, you can see it's a bit lighter now. And kind of whack off the whisk. I'm not 100% sure why I did that because it's going back in to the mixture anyway, but I did. Anyway, so next moving on to measuring out the more the flour kind of mixture. So I have my gluten-free flour in a case, as you can see. It's actually a cereal box, which I've just written over the top of the label to stop anything getting into my flour. And then I just use a spoon. It does have a hole that you can use to pour it, but I just use a spoon because it's easier, makes less mess. So yeah, I'm doing 220 grams of this gluten-free self-raising flour, but this is Dove's Farm gluten-free self-raising flour. I haven't tried the other types, so I couldn't comment on how they work, but this one works just fine. I'm sure the other ones would work fine as well. Then into that, I'm just going to add my xanthan gum and baking powder. You want to make sure that you mix them through with the flour really, so that it's like evenly distributed in the flour, because that's where you want it. And you can add a pinch of salt as well, just to cut through a little bit of that sweetness. So this is me adding in the nutmeg and the cinnamon, which really are just necessary, I think. I think these would be really good at Christmas too. There goes the cinnamon. I use about half a teaspoon of nutmeg and about a teaspoon worth of cinnamon. But really, as much as the heart desires. Although, not really. I wouldn't recommend doing too much. So anyway, I mix them through with just my little spoon. And then we're also going to need our 4 eggs. I find that gluten-free baking tends to use more eggs. I think it's just because it's a pretty solid binder. If you can't have eggs though, you could try the flaxseed replacement. I've used that a couple of times. I haven't in this recipe though, so I don't want to say it definitely works. But it's definitely worth a try. So I hesitantly crack those eggs into the bowl, 4 of them. I usually do 4 medium eggs. I think these ones might be large on this day, but I usually do medium. Usually I crack them into a separate bowl because I'm not that good at not getting the shell in there. But on this day I did okay at not getting the shell in. So I just check those shells in the bin and wash my hands off and then get that mixed through. So in my KitchenAid it goes. And I just mix it until it's well combined. There we go. Get that mixing through. Obviously we need to add the apples as well. But I mix through the ingredients for the muffin and then I add in the apple. Also make sure to scrape down your bowl as well to make sure nothing gets stuck to the side too much. And already, because you had the cinnamon and the nutmeg, it already smells so good before you've even baked them. So at this point you want to make sure that you've got your oven preheating at about 175 degrees Celsius. So that once you've got these into the trays, the tray can just go straight into the oven. So there you can see that it's pretty well combined, so we're about done mixing it through. And it looks pretty good there. So we just need to add in our apples. So because I had them soaking in water, I'm just using my hand to pull them out of the bowl and into our mixture. Usually I will coat things in flour before I add them into muffins or cupcakes, but these don't sink to the bottom, so you don't need to bother with that step. And because these ones are on the tartar side, or like the more sour side, they're so like just juicy as you bite into the cupcake, or the muffin should I say. I imagine the sweeter ones would also be really juicy though. I think that's just preference. So anyway, we don't need to mix these in too much, just make sure they're mixed throughout the mixture. And then we can finally get these into our muffin tray and into the oven. So about this point, it should be mixed through well enough, and we can get it all mixed through. Not mixed through, all into the tray. So next we just need to line our tray with some cases. Well, you don't have to line the tray with cases. I just choose to line the tray with cases because it makes less of a mess, and I just find it more practical for eating if it has a case on. So I just use some white cases that I have from, I think from Tesco. And my tray is from IKEA. I think it was about £15, but I can't remember. I've had it for about a year now though, so it's kept in pretty good condition because I do use it fairly regularly. I will say that the grooves around the holes make them quite hard to clean. Sometimes you have to get like a toothpick out to get into them. Anyway, now I just use 2 spoons and spoon the batter into the cases. There's quite a lot of mixture, so you can afford to fill these quite high. But don't forget you need to add the crumble streusel topping on the top, so don't overfill them. Anyway, I'll speed up through that. So once we've emptied the bowl and got all the cases filled up, we can start making our crumble streusel topping to go on top of the cupcakes. Or muffins. I keep calling them cupcakes, but they're more muffins. But whatever you want to call them really. So I get my bowl soaking in the sink, ready to be cleaned, and I just use a little bowl to make up the streusel topping. So initially I do get the measurements a little bit wrong, so I'll just tell you the correct amount of flour to use rather than the amount that I used, which was a little bit too low, and then I had to add in more. So I start off with about 50 grams worth of butter, again, dairy-free butter. So once that's placed in the bowl, we need about, not too much sugar. Really, you can just do like a couple of tablespoons full, but I did about 20 grams worth of sugar. And flour, I would say you probably want about 250 grams of flour. I started off with 150 and it wasn't enough. I needed to add more. So I would recommend just doing 250 grams of flour. Oh wait, no, sorry, I said that wrong. I started off with 50 grams of flour and it wasn't enough. Probably do about 150 to 200 grams of flour. I mostly just do this part of texture. I'm used to making crumbles and stuff, so I know what the topping's meant to be like. And you could also add some oats through, gluten-free oats if you're gluten-free. But I find that oats can sometimes irritate me, so I tend not to eat too many oats. Even if they are gluten-free, they just sometimes irritate me. So I didn't add any oats, but you definitely could add oats. It would add a bit more to the texture. But with or without oats, the texture's still great. Anyway, I just use my hands, I just wash my hands and then use my hands to crumble this up as if you're making apple crumble or anything. So just rub in the flour in to the butter with your fingers and the sugar. Kind of rub them in between until it looks like breadcrumbs. I like to have some bigger chunks though. See, at this point you can see that it's far too wet, so I end up adding in more flour. That's what I mean about the hole in the top. The flour does have a hole in the top. It just makes a little bit more mess because it can fly out easier. Anyway, once you get to the consistency that you like, you can just add that onto the top of your muffins, and then you're all set. You can get them into the oven. So they cook for about 20 minutes. I would go 20 to 25 minutes to check on them. Obviously, just cook them until if you put a knife through or a toothpick through, nothing liquidy comes out on them. And always make sure to preheat your oven with things like this. And try to cook them on the middle tray if you can, because it will be more even cooking on the middle. So you can see my hands are completely covered with the topping, but that's absolutely fine. And you could add a bit more cinnamon on top if you're a huge cinnamon lover. I am, but I chose not to. Anyway, I am also going to clean off this tray a little bit because I've made a bit of a mess on it. And you don't want that to bake on, because if it bakes on, then it's even harder to get off. So I do just try and clear it up a little bit before I get it into the oven. But anyway, after all that, we get our yummy muffins into the oven, and they smell absolutely delicious before going in, and they smell and look delicious coming out, as you'll see in a second. So in they go at 175 for about 20 to 25 minutes, and out they come. And look how much they've puffed up. They look delicious. They were delicious, and they smell delicious. So I hope you give it a go, and if you do, let me know how it goes. I forgot to make a video of me cutting into them, but they were fantastic. So thank you, and see you next time. Bye!